Hello and welcome to Indus Special. I'm Meshal Malik. In 1963, Stephen Hawking, the world-renowned physicist, was diagnosed with a form of motor neuron disease. And in 2011, Hawking wrote, "Disability need not to be an obstacle to success." Stephen Hawking's own life and the lives of countless other individuals, including Frida Kahlo, Helen Keller, Sudra Chandan, Stevie Wonder, are testaments to the fact that an individual possesses unmeasurable potential. On tonight's show, we discuss how those who are disabled are not lacking in abilities, but rather they are differently abled. And embracing the diversity of individuals will always lead to greater societal well-being. To explore our topic today, we're joined by Atif Magbool, who's a psychiatrist, joining us from Doha. Also joining us is Steve Wilkinson, who is a wheelchair user himself and the founder of International Wheelchair Day. Thank you so much both for joining us. Steve, I'd like to begin with you. How important and why exactly is the conversation of disability important when we talk about the economy, public spaces, and societal well-being at large?
I think you used the words in your intro of differently abled, and you're bringing up the especially abled. And this disability to me is something that is a transient thing because, at that moment while I'm speaking to you here, I'm sitting in a chair. Okay, it's got wheels on, but yeah. I feel no different. I'm not disabled at this point in time. But I think we've been subject to prejudices for a long time. I certainly have from childhood, where things like access and attitudes to disability aren't fully understood by a lot of people. And I think there's opportunities for inclusion and better accessibility to, for everyone, really.
And Steve, you talk about the prejudice you faced earlier in your life. Can you tell us more about that? And do you think that this prejudice had to do with ignorance?
Absolutely, I agree 100%. The one that when I first encountered it was during school. In the UK, at that time, we had an exam that you took at 11, called the 11 plus, and that determined what stream of education you could go into after that. Now, I had spent a number of years in hospital getting some education up till the age of 8, but then I went to a special junior school for the next 3 years. But then I passed the exam, and that entitled me to go to a grammar school, and I could have coped at a mainstream grammar school. But the initial thought was that I wouldn't be able to do so. And it was a case of demonstrating to them. They eventually gave me a trial that I could cope, and I went on and had a normal education in a mainstream school and went on to university after that. But the initial thoughts were I wouldn't be able to cope. Someone had decided for me that because I was using a wheelchair and I walked with sticks at the time, that categorizing me basically and saying that I wouldn't therefore be able to cope.
Yeah. And of course, I'm sure that's an experience many individuals relate to. And I do want to ask you more about the experiences you've heard of other individuals who are wheelchair users. But before that, I'd like to ask Mr. Atif, while we're talking about disabilities here and trying to set the premise of the debate, could you tell us about when and how exactly in the human body most commonly are disabilities formed? Are they during birth? Are they genetically transferred? We do know that accidents cause that, but if you could just shed more light on that.
Thank you very much, first of all, for having me with you today. And before answering your question, I would like to thank Steve. I liked what he said, and I agree with him. And I don't like to call it disability. I would prefer to use restricted ability, because all of us, we have some restrictions in our ability to do stuff. It could be different from person to person, and there's different forms of this restricted ability to do things, even with people who think they are normal, or what we call them normal people. They also have some restrictions, so I don't like to use this term. But going to answer the question, yes, there are different stages in our lives that damage can happen to some person's body that may cause this restricted ability. Starting even during pregnancy, before even the child is born. So if the mother was having any difficulty during the pregnancy, like being ill or taking medication, some form of pill that may cause any deformity, or even exposed to X-ray or drinking alcohol or taking drugs, all of these substances are known to cause damage to some people while they were in their mother's uterus, even before they see the light of life. So it can happen even before birth, and also during birth. Sometimes when injury or trauma happens while the baby is born, especially damage to the head or to the brain, may cause chronic illness or chronic restricted ability to develop as other people who did not suffer from this injury during birth. And again, moving from there during early childhood, also having severe illness or being exposed to chemicals or even injuries may result in different and long life form of inability.
Okay.
Having road accidents or different stuff can cause
yes.
us to have difficulties throughout our life.
And Mr. Atif, here, the UN also had a report which stated that poverty may increase the risk of disability through malnutrition, inadequate access of education and healthcare. Please tell us a little about that too.
Because we know that in the well-developed countries, the education level and the healthcare is well structured. And I would like again to go through the causes of disability. So if we say it can happen during pregnancy, then education, if the mother is being well educated and the community are aware of the difficulty that can lead to these problems during pregnancy, with again healthcare, follow-up, regular follow-up during pregnancy, and even during the labor, if the child is being born at home or in a very deprived area, not like somebody who was born in a well-equipped hospital to deal with any difficulties or any problems during the labor of the child. So there is medical team, well-trained, good equipment to try to help the child if they are exposed to loss of oxygen, which is simple thing that can cause damage to the brain if they are not being treated properly at the same time. So as you can see, and even after the delivery of the baby during childhood, if there is well system established in the country where people can access help, can know what to do, how to deal with emergency, if in a car road accident happens, how far they can get treated, how far they be transferred to the hospital. So you can see when we have everything developed in the environment or in the area where we live, that may reduce the chance of having these difficulties.
Okay. Mr. Atif, hold on to that thought. Before we progress and talk more about this, also like to go back to Steve's experience. And Steve, you are known as Wheelchair Steve. Please tell us about that. What is the idea behind that, taking ownership of that? Tell us the thought process.
Well, it actually came, a nickname my friends called me many years ago. It was just that, to distinguish me, it was, you stick a tag on somebody and it was a name that stuck. And I used it, my brand name, when I had my business. I've retired from working now, but since early 2004, I think it was, when I started in business, I chose that as a brand name. And it's a name that's identified, and it identifies me. I'm in a wheelchair, and so called Steve. So why not?
Yeah.
And it's a name that people recognize me by.
And Steve, here I want to have an open conversation about this. And you said that it's something that identified you. So many individuals, when they want to engage in a conversation with individuals such as yourself who are users of wheelchairs, how should they go about it? Because every person's experience is different here, but you're saying that you allowed the wheelchair to identify you. But do you think that's something that should be done all across the board by society at large?
No, I think the important thing is to treat the person as an individual.
Yeah.
Forgetting the difficulty you have in a wheelchair. Let's look at disability in general. Atif was talking about the various different types, and it's a problem that the world, the attitudes of people categorizes everybody the same, and everybody is absolutely different, and even people using a wheelchair are different because they all have different needs. It's down to needs, which is the important thing, and it's the difficulty you have is people see somebody in a wheelchair and they make assumptions based on other people they know in a wheelchair. So that's what isn't correct, in my opinion, is that you've got to get to know that person as a person, and then you find out more about them and what their abilities are. When we're talking about disabilities and abilities, it's more important to understand their abilities and where they're going to need extra help, perhaps, to cope with some of the challenges that having the medical condition. I don't like to call it a disability. It's a medical condition that disables me. I had spina bifida. Again, as Atif was talking, the varying levels of vitamins that you receive pre-birth. I think spina bifida came from a lack of folic acid is something I think in the way back was the problem when I was born in the 1950s, and parents not getting enough folic acid, and I think that was one of the contributing factors to spina bifida. Yeah.
And I take your point there, Steve. And you are the founder of International Wheelchair Day, and it seems that you are moving towards trying to create a positive dialogue regarding this. And I wonder, did you always have a positive relation with this medical condition, or did you have to change it over time, or how did you live with it? What were the struggles, and how did you overcome that?
Yeah, when I mentioned the school was one, I think, and that probably gave me a positive attitude to show people that there wasn't a barrier.
Yeah,
that's really a word that's often used, that people made assumptions on what I was capable of doing, and I wanted to really show them, because I had the attitude to achieve and overcome the challenges that I was facing. I think, and a lot of people have that attitude, that if you can put aside the barriers you've got, and it doesn't necessarily relate to disability, it relates to anything, what your situation in your life is, that there are a lot of people worse off than I am, significantly, with whether it's a medical condition or in the where they live, or all sorts of different ways. But if you attack that problem with a positive attitude, and I think that's what I've always done, and I like to, almost by default, I became a role model that people related to, and they come up with this word inspirational. I'm always not sure whether that's the right word, but if people choose that, then that's fine, because all I'm doing is getting on with my life, despite the fact that I use a wheelchair and I cannot walk now. I used to be able to walk with sticks. I cannot do that now. I just get on with life, and the barriers that are there, I overcome. And there are times when I need extra help to be able to do that, because of the restrictions that are in place in certain aspects of the society that we come to.
Definitely. And Steve, I can tell by all the work that you've done, there must have been a lot of public engagement. So how did you pass on that positive message, and how do you continue to pass on that positive message to other folks out there who are struggling, and not necessarily, as you said, with a disability, but just with life in general?
Well, I really started sort of publicly being involved in probably the late 90s. I was involved with football, soccer, or I don't know what you call it in India, in Pakistan. But I was a Newcastle United supporter, still am, and I started going to football matches and realizing there was problems in getting access to football stadiums. So I partly set up a supporters group then for disabled people involved with supporting Newcastle United. There was a national association at that time, and we started getting collective activity going on, and it started becoming more public then. I then started to do some talks related to the Disability Discrimination Act, which was 1995 in the UK, and that was coming in stages. And the key date for me was October 2004. By then, businesses were supposed to have removed barriers preventing access to the facilities and services they had. And I was working with a company at that time doing talks and seminars, and trying to put the point of view from somebody who was a wheelchair user and the challenges. And I actually thought that the legislation would work. I wasn't conscious of the problems that were yet to follow, but it became a law that was very difficult to enforce because of it being, it's a civil law, it's not a criminal offence, so there's no police force that is enforcing accessibility and removing those barriers. I think it's quite difficult to do, make somewhere accessible for everybody with a disability. You know, as we talked earlier on, there are so many different types and circumstances that sometimes you can put a facility in that will help some people, but it will be a negative thing for someone else. And so it's very difficult to cater for everybody. So I really focused on the challenges people with wheelchairs and mobility issues. You know, where we have the main issues, I would say, are getting into buildings, if there are steps, or getting around on pavements that are inadequate, and stairs and things like that. That's the main challenge that we often face if you're in a wheelchair.
I definitely want to understand more of how you can, what would you say to town planners, designers in terms of accessibility to public spaces. But before that, I'd like us to watch a little video together of another individual who does have medical conditions, but who continues to inspire many individuals.
I love the stories where you hear that someone's going through a difficulty. It doesn't matter what it is, as far as being a physical or emotional or some other disability of the heart. You know, you don't have to be in a wheelchair to know what pain is. Does that make sense? We all go through brokenness. We all go through fear. We all go through times of being alone. But I believe that everyone has a story to share and can be a miracle for someone else. I've actually now met 30 people with no arms, no legs, and of course now they're encouraged to know that if Nick can do it, then I can do it. But I don't know what anyone's gone through. Maybe I don't know what you've gone through. I don't know what the camera person has gone through. But you all can also, you know, share your story with someone else who's maybe going through the same situation, to let them know that, hey, I was once there as well. I was also scared and alone, but I got through it. You can too.
That was another very inspirational story of Nick, who has overcome many barriers and has succeeded in life. Mr. Atif, I'd like to ask you here that we talked about inspiration. We talked about Steve's positive outlook. We also saw a video here. But of course, when there are many individuals who are struggling with adopting a positive outlook, what role does the community need to play in that? What role do rehabilitation centers need to play in that? Please shed light on that.
For the society, I think there is a big role that we should play all together to make those people feel inclusive and not to feel that there is any inequality against them. So they should be, their problem should be understood, and we should increase the public awareness of this kind of difficulties that could happen to anybody at any stage of their life. And we should increase the acceptance of people with these difficulties, and we should encourage them to celebrate their achievements and acknowledge their contributions to our society, and developing services that are user-friendly for them, and trying to, for example, if somebody lost ability to do something, that doesn't mean they are, as Steve said, they are not disabled, but they have problem or difficulty performing this task, but they can do other tasks better than a lot of other people. So we should encourage this. There should be centers. There should be education, learning, training for people who lost some of these abilities, to try to train them, make them capable of doing other activities that we never thought about doing it before, and trying to make them aware of their difficulties, and challenging themselves and trying to continue with their lives without feeling any discrimination against them.
Definitely. And Mr. Atif, also here, how important is the need for dialogue, the need to just talk about something, as opposed to feeling uncomfortable around a subject or feeling that it should not be approached at all?
Yeah, this is common mistake. Most people, even when somebody meets with with a person who has difficulties or any problem, they try to avoid talking or mentioning. When they talk about anything, but they avoid to mention or talk about it. I think it's even for the person themselves. They should advocate for themselves. They should be their own advocate. They should talk to people, explain their emotions, their feelings, and invite people to talk and discuss and communicate. Especially when it is something that you feel that you need to talk about it.
Yeah.
I'm very proud of what Steve's saying now, because people need to know that there are people they may be capable of doing a lot of things that other people cannot do, and they have other talents, other hobbies that they can develop, and they can help others and can inspire others to do stuff that they never thought that they will be able to do.
Okay, Mr. Atif, hold on to that thought. We're going to discuss this further. Steve, we're going to discuss this further, but before that, we're just going to go for a short break. Welcome back to Indus Special. While we continue our discussion today, now we're joined by Mr. Mohammed Atif Sheikh, who's the Executive Director of STEP Pakistan, who has also worked on many inclusion projects, inclusion projects for the differently abled. Also joining us is Waleed Kamran, who himself is a wheelchair user and works in a cafe here in Lahore. Waleed, let's begin with you. Tell us about your experiences in life to begin with.
Actually, I've been working with the Sweet Tooth. It's been a month, and the staff over here is very cooperative. I've given very suitable environment, like my family and all the relatives are very happy with the job.
That's great. And
actually,
Waleed, tell us more about the job. How is the experience of that?
The job experience is very good. I've had many employees. The employees are not too harsh with me. They're very cooperative, and they treat me as their brother.
That's great.
And I really enjoy working over here. And like you can say, the boss himself is the gym, and our supervisor, she is very cooperative with me and all staff. So I enjoy working in such an environment.
So, Waleed, we'll talk more about your experience here and generally your experience of when it comes to accessibility and how your life has been progressing so far. But before that, I'd like to ask Mr. Atif Sheikh here a question that I asked earlier too. How important, when we're talking about the economy, when we're talking about businesses evolving, when we're talking about inclusion and education, is the debate regarding those who have medical conditions? How important is that while considering the debate regarding diversity?
Sure. In my point of view, actually, disability is a diversified way of living. If we accept disability as a diversity, then we can have an inclusive society.
Yes.
And then we can make all the facilities inclusive for persons with disabilities. But there are two approaches again. Like, first of all, people with disabilities themselves, they have to understand that disability is a lifestyle. This is not a medical issue. This is not a disease. They have to accept it as a lifestyle. On the other hand, the society has to play an important role. Like whatever we are doing, we are building, constructing the buildings, we are making transport available for them, or we are learning in language. If we think that people with disabilities are part of the society, then we can include them. We can make buildings in such a way that they have access for the wheelchair users. We can develop our technology, ICT particularly, which is very common now, indispensable. So we can make our ICT technology accessible for the visually impaired persons. We can learn sign language as another language, and then people with hearing impairment can be part of the society. They can study in the same schools, they can go to the same employment opportunities, and they can enjoy the life. So we have to accept it. And above all, there is the need of a law. Like in Pakistan, since 1981, we don't have a law to protect the rights of persons with disabilities. There should be a law which bound every single business, organization, and community to make their services inclusive for everyone, not for the few. Then the society will be inclusive. And one thing which you asked earlier, that how is it possible, or
and Mr. Atif,
whether it is important to debate this topic or not.
Mr. Atif, I do want to talk further about the policies of inclusion that are required. But before that, since you mentioned it as well, that how it's important to remember that a normal lifestyle is possible, I'd like to show a video of Sprash Shah, who's a 12-year-old prodigy in the US who was born with almost 40 fractures. Let's watch the video together.
That no matter what happens in your life, you should never, ever give up on your passion. Everyone in this world goes through struggles of some sort. And I know, because I, for one, have to deal with constant fractures and lots of pain. But I believe that if I can turn impossible into I'm possible in my life, you can too. If you can believe it, you can achieve it.
And Mr. Atif, we were talking about here previously to Mr. Atif Sheikh how a positive outlook in life is needed. But obviously here as well, we need to make sure that the policies are also inclusive towards those, especially children who are suffering from disabilities and medical conditions, to ensure that earlier on in life they have equal opportunities. UNESCO stated that 90% of children with disabilities in developing countries do not attend school. What needs to be done to change that?
There are two things. Again, the schools need to be made inclusive, and the rehabilitation services for the children at the very early age are very important. Like early intervention is the most important thing, where the medical department or the health department, social welfare and education, they all together decide what are the needs of this child and which school he or she can go. Like if they have a mild disability, or they just need an assistive device and go to the mainstream school, or they have a severe disability, they can go to the special education center. So it's a holistic approach. The responsibility starts from the parents, but the state has a very important role to play. They have to integrate all the services which are required to manage their disability. So that's the only way we can ensure inclusive education. We have seen in other countries, we have seen, heard in this video as well, like it's a comprehensive approach. A person alone can't do anything, or the family. So every part of the society, whether they are private school systems, they're run by the public, so they should include the aspect of disability and inclusion and diversity within their system.
Yes.
And for that, definitely we need a very comprehensive policy of the legislation in the country.
Definitely. And with that, I also want to ask Steve here. Steve, companies these days, buzzwords such as diversity, we've all heard of it. But we are also seeing that a WHO report also stated that economic cooperation and development countries often fail to fill the quotas that are set for those individuals who are experiencing medical conditions, and they would rather prefer paying fines as opposed to hiring those individuals. What needs to be done to bring about a structural change here?
I think it's very much down to education, and it's a slow process, unfortunately, because everyone's talked about the same thing, really. The same point is that people need to understand a lot more about it. And I've been doing talks, as I said earlier on, at least, 15 years or so now. And in schools, it's getting better, but it's very slow. And I think we need to expedite it a lot more, because more and more people are being born with conditions that are able to be managed now. We're able to get around it a lot more, but the pace of change isn't fast enough. Mr. Atif talked about there the legislation coming in. And the problem is that this legislation has been around for lots of years in the UK. And you're absolutely right. The enforcement of it is down to the individual. We have to take a personal claim against an organisation who doesn't comply with the legislation. There isn't a police force or a health and safety executive or a disability executive that is enforcing the legislation. So while that's the case, no one is going to, and individuals aren't going to be going through the hassles of having to enforce the legislation. And therefore, you're absolutely right. If anyone is taking action, it's relatively small settlements through the courts. And so therefore, the doing something isn't really a threat.
Okay. Also, Steve, with that, I'd also like to play another video of Stephen Hawking here, which I feel relevant to the conversation. Let's take a look at it.
It's been a help in a way. It has freed me from teaching or sitting on boring committees and given me more time to think and do research. Theoretical physics is one of the few fields in which being disabled is no handicap. It's all in the mind.
So, Mr. Sheikh here, we have seen another video by Stephen Hawking, and he is one of the most renowned physicists out there. So when we're talking about disabilities, medical conditions, and how important is it for policymakers to keep this in mind? How much talent is hidden? How much talent is underutilized if they do not create more accessible spaces for individuals who do suffer from these medical conditions?
You know, every person in the society has unique capabilities, talents, or limitations. So they need an environment to develop or nurture their qualities and contribute to the society. Just like that, every person with disabilities needs an environment. If people with disabilities are given adequate assistive devices, for example, the very basic thing is the wheelchair. If they are given, they can move around. If they are given the hearing aids, or the blind people are given the braille or digital technology, they can move around, they can get access to the information. So it's all about the enabling environment. If you will enable the environment, nobody will be disabled. And for that, we need the legislation. And secondly, what my friend has mentioned very rightly, that UK has a very good legislation. American Disability Act is already in place. But how to implement these laws which affect the lives of people with disabilities? People with disabilities themselves should be involved in the policy making process and in the decision making process. In Pakistan, I will talk about the context of South Asian, particularly in Pakistan. People with disabilities are not included in the decision making process at the parliament level. If they are present there, their voices will be heard and the policies will be inclusive. So visibility of persons with disabilities on there and having their voices at the decision-making table is really important to have an effective policy making.
Mr. Sheikh, you also led a project team of enrollment of girls with disabilities in KP. And regarding this, I'd like to ask you, what is the problem of intersectionality with this with disabilities? Can you tell us about that? How is it different for different groups of people?
Sure. As you mentioned about this project of empowering women with disabilities, that's the real example of highlighting the intersectionality in the disability area. Like if we have people with disabilities in the urban areas, they have limited access to the services to some extent. But if they are in the rural areas, the poverty and the disability are chasing each other. And if they are women with disabilities, they are triple marginalized in the society. Having a disability, poverty, and they are women. So while we were working in the KP to include women with disabilities in the education process, we particularly faced these challenges, and above all was the attitudinal barriers. Like first of all, we have to change the mindset of the people. They have to accept disabled women as part of the society. You know, in developing countries, I will not mention only in Pakistan, but I have seen in several countries this issue, that people with disabilities are being treated at the two extremes. Once they are like punishment of the sins, and they are hidden in their families. They are confined in their houses because it's a stigma, and families don't want to show them. Secondly, sometimes they are being worshipped.
And Mr.
And
Sheikh,
people
you're
think that
really,
they are related to God, ask them for the prayer. So they are not considered as a normal human being.
And Mr. Sheikh, understand over there how there are many layers that women have to face with when we're talking about intersectionality and disability. But with that, I'd also like to bring Waleed here into the conversation. Waleed, as you are a youth and you are a much younger individual, tell us about how your experience during your schooling was and how was it? Do you want to continue your education?
I've been studying in Beacon House, and it was a very good experience. Actually, I would like to explain one thing. My family is very open with me.
Yeah.
So they allow me to go wherever I want. So they have given me a good high school teaching. So it's a very good life for me. I really want that it's the mindset that Atif was telling. I really want to second his thought that he was saying the thought of my mind. Really, we have to change the mindset of this particular society. And
And Waleed, in your opinion, what do you think needs to be done in order to change the mentality? Do you think, as Steve also pointed out here, that those who do have medical conditions need to be at the forefront, need to be actively engaging with the public in order to change that mindset and that perception?
Yes. I really want the government to come forward and to stand with the people with disabilities and make employment easy for people like us. And secondly, I would want the government should get accessible transport.
Yeah. And Waleed, hold on to that thought. Steve, you are actually engaged with social media as well. Tell us how important that is as a platform to spread awareness, to spread the message further.
I think social media, which wasn't around at the time when I started, doing the work that I was doing in the early 2000s, but it's certainly come to the fore in the last, I suppose, 8 or 9 years. Things like International Wheelchair Day, which is the 1st of March, and it has been celebrated around the world. It certainly demonstrates how things have spread. There's been activities in Pakistan, Kathmandu. We've had things in Africa and Australia. And all of that has come from social media. And it shows that by using social media, you can get messages out there. And because a lot of people are sharing and passing on information and having similar opinions to everything that's been expressed today by everyone. But I think we're all of this mind that it's about making more people aware and possibly bringing in legislation, making more accessibility for people with medical conditions that disable them. That's how I like to think of it. As I said earlier on, it's not I don't feel disabled. I am from time to time, but it's society that disables us, and it can remove that. Yes, you give a wheelchair to someone, as was mentioned earlier on. That is what we're celebrating on International Wheelchair Day. It's the freedom a wheelchair gives us to get out and about. But then challenges occur because of that, because not everywhere is fully accessible, and that's what we need to address. Secondly.
Yes. And Steve, I take your point that that is one of the major things that needs to be addressed now with all these innovations out there. Why aren't we moving towards more accessible public spaces? And with that, I'd like to ask Mr. Atif Sheikh, what can we do to create and make sure that the design layout of cities, places is more inclusive, allows for a greater accessibility of people globally?
Yeah, actually it depends on the visibility of person with disabilities. If more wheelchair users are coming out of their houses for the social life, it will create a massive awareness that we need to make society inclusive. Secondly, like the building codes of all the countries should have addressed that issue of accessibility in their designs. Or like we have seen in different countries now, they have building codes and accessibility codes embedded in their national building codes. So it should be backed by a law. And secondly, the wheelchair, as Steve mentioned that on the 1st March we are going to observe the National Wheelchair Day. On this day particularly, we need to highlight that wheelchair is an important part for mobilization of person with disability, for the mobility of person with disability. Actually,
yes.
In Pakistan, the wheelchairs are not.
And Mr. Sheikh, here, since we're running out of time, I'm just going to pass question to Waleed here. Waleed, what do you see in your future? What would you like to achieve now? What is the next big step?
My big step is that whatever hurdles or obstacles are created in my way, I would like to just break each obstacle and achieve my goal. Besides that, I'm disabled. I would not let anyone that know that I am disabled. Actually, we are able, but differently able.
Definitely.
We are not disabled.
And Waleed, that's a very strong message you've given out there. It's important to remember those who are different than you are not disabled, who are not less than you, but they are differently abled. And with that, I'd like to end the show. Thank you so much, Mr. Atif Magbool for joining us, Mr. Atif Sheikh for joining us, Waleed Kamran for joining us, Steve Wilkinson for joining us. Thank you for watching Indus Special. We'll see you again tomorrow. Goodbye.